My name is Naomi Carter, and I'm 25 years old. By the time this happened, I already owned my house, ran my own plumbing business, and had learned how to stay calm when people tried to make me feel smaller than I was. What I hadn't learned yet was how quickly love could turn ugly when the person beside you started caring more about appearances than truth. If you'd asked me in the beginning whether Ethan and I were solid, I would have said yes without hesitation. That's the embarrassing part. For the first few months, he was easy to love. He was funny in a dry, low-key way, confident without seeming arrogant. The kind of man who could walk into a room and make people feel like they already knew him. He worked as a manager at an upscale boutique downtown, and he carried himself like someone who belonged in polished spaces, clean lines, expensive cologne, crisp shirts that always looked freshly pressed. At first, I liked the contrast between us. I worked long hours, came home smelling faintly of metal, drywall dust, and detergent, and never pretended to be anything other than what I was. He seemed to admire that. At first, we'd been together 8 months when everything cracked open. He had been living in my house for 4 of those months. My house, paid off, no mortgage, no landlord, no shared lease drama hanging over our heads. I bought it young because I started my business early and worked like I had something to prove, even when nobody was watching. Ethan used to say he loved that about me. Then his tone changed. It started subtly enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. A joke here, a strange look there, little comments that sounded harmless if you repeated them out of context. Do you ever think about doing something different long term? Different how? I don't know, something more polished. More polished. Like pipes cared whether the hands fixing them had manicures. Like emergency calls at 2 in the morning were somehow less real because they didn't happen under office lighting. At first, I laughed it off. I made good money. Better money than a lot of people our age. My business was stable, my client list was packed, and I was booked out months in advance. I wasn't insecure about what I did. I never had been. Plumbing had given me everything, my independence, my home, my savings, my peace. But Ethan had started spending more time with people from work, and after that, something in him shifted. He began talking about appearances like they were a third person in the relationship. One night, while we were cleaning up after dinner, he leaned against the counter and said, "Everyone at work lives in those new downtown condos. You know, the ones with the rooftop pools and skyline views." I kept rinsing plates. Good for them. He gave a little laugh, like I'd missed the point. "I'm just saying, those places are so much nicer than this neighborhood." I turned off the water and looked at him. "This house is paid off. Why would I move somewhere just to pay rent every month?" He shrugged. "Because sometimes it's not just about the money." I dried my hands slowly. "What's it about then?" He hesitated, then said, "Lifestyle." That word sat between us. Not stability, not ownership, not peace. Lifestyle. I remember looking around my kitchen that night, the warm light under the cabinets, the granite counters I paid for myself, the herb pots by the window, the room I had built one invoice at a time, and feeling something cold slide through me. Not anger yet, just recognition. A sharp little warning I didn't want to fully hear. Still, I stayed. Because when someone hurts you gradually, your heart gets involved in explaining it away. A few days later, the comments got worse. He started getting weird whenever people asked about my work. Not strangers, his coworkers, his new friends, people I had never even met. One evening, while we were getting ready for a small event tied to his job, he stood in front of the mirror, fixing his collar, and said, too casually, "Tonight, if anyone asks, maybe just tell them you own a property services company." I stared at him through the mirror. "I own a plumbing company." "I know," he laughed, but there was tension in it. "Property services just sounds broader." "Broader or better?" His hand froze at his collar. "That's not what I meant." "It is, though." He looked at me then, irritated that I'd said the quiet part out loud. "Naomi, you know how people are." "No," I said. "I know how you are when you think other people are judging you." That started our first real fight about it. He told me I was being defensive. I told him I was being accurate. He said it wasn't about money. That line again. Not about money. Not about the fact that I paid the utilities without asking him to split them. Not about the fact that the roof over his head belonged to me. Not about the fact that when his car needed work 2 months earlier, I'd quietly covered part of it because he was stressed and I loved him. No, according to Ethan, it was about how things looked. And somehow, that was supposed to make it better. The real downhill slide started when he began hanging out with 2 women from work, Lila and Brooke, and their boyfriends. I never met them at first, but I heard enough. Lila's boyfriend worked in digital marketing. Brooke's boyfriend was in corporate finance. Their dates sounded like performance art for social media. Wine country weekends, luxury hotels, rooftop bars, matching luggage. Every time Ethan came home from being with them, he seemed more dissatisfied with me. Or maybe not with me, with what loving me said about him. One night, he was scrolling through photos on his phone and paused at one of Lila and her boyfriend standing in front of some ocean view resort. He tilted the screen toward me. See, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. I glanced at it. A vacation? A real vacation. I gave him a flat look. We literally talked about Costa Rica. He set the phone down. That's different. How? He exhaled like I was making things difficult on purpose. I don't know, Naomi. It just is. That answer did something to me, because by then I knew what he meant, even when he didn't want to say it cleanly. He wanted things that photographed well. He wanted a girlfriend people would find impressive without needing an explanation. A woman with a title that sounded elegant at brunch. A woman whose success fit neatly into other people's assumptions. Not me. Not the woman who could replace a burst main before sunrise and still come home steady. Not the woman who had built a business with her bare hands and knew exactly what every dollar in her account had cost her. The week everything finally exploded, he texted me on Friday afternoon while I was finishing a commercial repair job. Ethan, let's do dinner tomorrow night. Somewhere nice. I wiped my hands on a rag and texted back. Me. Sure. What did you have in mind? He sent the name of one of those new upscale restaurants downtown, the kind with moody lighting, overpriced steaks, and cocktails dressed up like jewelry. Not really my scene, but fine. I figured maybe he was trying to reset the mood between us. Then another text came through. Ethan, I invited Lila and Brooke. They're boyfriends, too. Thought it'd be good for everyone to finally meet. I stood there staring at my phone. The air in the mechanical room felt suddenly close. That should have been my moment to say no. But I was still in that stage people don't talk about enough. The stage where you know something is wrong, and yet some part of you keeps hoping the next conversation will be the one that fixes it. The one where the person you fell for reappears. The one where all the tension turns out to be stress or insecurity or a phase. So I said yes. Saturday night, I got dressed in a black fitted dress and low heels. Nothing flashy, nothing apologetic. I wore my hair down and kept my makeup simple. I looked good, not for them, for me. For the version of myself that still believes showing up with dignity mattered. When we got to the restaurant, Lila and Brooke were already there with their boyfriends. You could tell exactly who everyone was within 10 seconds. Lila was glossy and bright and loud in that practiced way some people are when they know they're being watched. Brooke had the cooler version of the same energy, sharper, quieter, more judgment in her eyes. Their boyfriends looked like they had been printed from the same expensive template, fitted button-down shirts, polished watches, that smooth corporate ease men wear when they've never had to explain why their work dirties their hands. Introductions started pleasantly enough. This is my boyfriend, Kyle, Lila said, touching the sleeve of the man beside her. He works in digital marketing. Brooke smiled. And this is Daniel, corporate finance. Then it was Ethan's turn. He smiled tightly and gestured toward me. And this is my girlfriend, Naomi. She owns a maintenance company. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. Maintenance company. Not plumbing company, not business owner, not the truth. Just vague enough to make me sound smaller. Bland enough to sand off the part he was ashamed of. I turned my head and looked at him. He didn't look back. That was the moment I knew this dinner wasn't social. It was a test, and he had already decided I was the thing in the room that needed to be edited. The conversation rolled on, and every time one of them asked what I did, Ethan kept jumping in before I could answer. Naomi handles service contracts for residential and commercial properties. Her company does a little bit of everything. She's really hands-on. Every sentence technically close enough to truth to sound innocent. Every sentence deliberately shaped to avoid the one word he didn't want attached to me. Plumber. I sat there smiling just enough to be polite, but something inside me had gone very still. Then Daniel started talking about a luxury trip he was planning with Brooke. Bermuda, resort package, oceanfront, all-inclusive. Lila sighed dramatically. That is so romantic. Ethan leaned forward with an expression I already recognized. Hungry, dissatisfied, performing. We never do anything like that, he said, looking straight at me. I blinked. We talked about taking a trip this summer. He gave a light laugh. That's not really the same. Brooke tilted her glass. Some people just know how to do relationships right. Lila smiled into her wine. I looked at Ethan. What exactly is the difference? He held my gaze for half a second, then said, "It's about effort, Naomi." I thought about the lunches I had packed for him when he overslept, the bills I had absorbed without turning them into power, the nights I listened to him vent about work until after midnight, the room I cleared in my house so he'd have office space, the drawers I made for him. The key I handed over like trust was something sacred. But in that restaurant, in front of people whose names had barely settled in my head, none of that counted, because it didn't look impressive enough. I could feel the night tipping, not loudly, not all at once, just enough to know that whatever happened next was going to change everything. For the first time all evening, I stopped hoping he would save us from what he was building. I just waited to see how far he was willing to go. The rest of that dinner didn't explode all at once. It unraveled. Daniel was still talking about resorts. Lila was laughing too loudly. Brooke kept glancing at me like she was trying to decide if I was the joke or just part of it. And Ethan, he leaned back in his chair, relaxed, like he had already chosen his side. "Some people just understand how to level up," he said, swirling his drink. "They don't stay stuck." I set my fork down. "Stuck where?" I asked quietly. He looked at me, and for a second I saw hesitation flicker. Then it was gone. "In a place that doesn't match their potential." Lila let out a soft sound like she agreed. I nodded once, like I was processing. "Okay, define potential." Ethan smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Ambition, growth, being around people who are moving forward." "And I'm not?" The table went quieter. Even Daniel stopped talking. Ethan exhaled, like I was forcing him into something uncomfortable. "Naomi, don't do this." "Do what?" "Make everything a confrontation." I almost laughed, like he hadn't been picking me apart piece by piece in front of strangers. "Answer the question," I said, still calm. "Do you think I'm not moving forward?" He didn't answer immediately. That silence said more than anything else. Brooke shifted in her seat. "I mean, it's not about being rude, but some careers just have ceilings." There it was. I turned slightly toward her. "What kind of ceiling?" She gave a small shrug. "You know, there's only so far you can go without expanding into something more corporate." Ethan didn't stop her, didn't correct her, didn't defend me. That was the moment something inside me locked into place, because suddenly everything made sense. The comments, the discomfort, the way he kept editing my job into something easier to explain. He wasn't confused about who I was. He was embarrassed, and he had been for a while. I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Ethan, do you think I can't provide for you?" His eyes flickered, caught off guard by how direct that was. "That's not what I said." "It's exactly what you've been implying all night." Lila shifted again. Daniel picked up his glass, just to have something to do. Ethan rubbed his jaw. "It's not about money." I tilted my head slightly. "Then what is it about?" He hesitated, and then he said it. "Image." Just one word, but it hit harder than anything else. I nodded slowly. "So when people ask what your girlfriend does, you don't want to say she owns a plumbing company." He didn't respond. "That's why you said maintenance company earlier." Still nothing. "Because plumber doesn't sound impressive enough." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Naomi?" "No, it's fine," I cut in gently. "Let's be honest. That's what you wanted, right? Something that sounds better." Lila and Brooke exchanged another look. The air at the table had shifted completely now. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was uncomfortable. "Good." Ethan leaned forward slightly. "You're twisting this." "Am I?" "Yes. I'm saying there's more out there for you if you wanted it." "For me?" I let out a quiet breath. "Or for you." That landed. I saw it. The small flinch he couldn't hide fast enough. And suddenly I wasn't hurt anymore. I was clear, because this wasn't about helping me grow. This was about reshaping me into something he could present. I reached for my glass, took a slow sip, then set it down carefully. "Okay," I said, "let's talk about growth." Ethan frowned slightly, unsure where I was going. "You work full-time. You manage a boutique. You make, what, $60,000 a year?" His expression hardened. "That's not relevant." "It is if we're talking about potential." Lila blinked. "Wait." I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Ethan. "I run my own business," I said. "I have multiple contracts. I take emergency calls. I manage schedules, expenses, and employees. I built everything I have from nothing." My voice didn't rise. If I stopped working tomorrow, I'd still be fine for a long time. Ethan's face flushed. "Naomi, stop." "No," I said quietly. "You wanted to have this conversation in public. Let's finish it in public." Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. Brooke suddenly found her glass very interesting. Lila sat frozen. And Ethan looked like he was realizing, a second too late, that he had miscalculated. "I don't care about exact numbers," he said, trying to regain control. "That's not the point." I nodded once. "Right. because 10 minutes ago you implied I couldn't provide for you.
I didn't. You did.
Silence. Heavy this time. I leaned forward slightly. Do you want to know how much I made last year? He didn't answer, so I answered anyway. 160,000. The table went completely still. Lila's mouth parted slightly. Daniel blinked. Brooke actually turned her head to look at me fully for the first time. Ethan stared at me like he had never seen me before. Naomi, he said slowly. I held his gaze. You live in my house, I continued, just as calm. You eat food I buy. You sleep in a bed I paid for. And you sat here tonight and let people imply I had limits. No one spoke. And you agreed. That was the part that mattered. Not what Lila said, not what Brooke implied. Him, choosing silence when it cost him nothing to speak. His voice came out quieter now. I didn't think it would go this far. I let out a small breath. That's the problem. You didn't think. I reached into my bag, pulled out cash, and placed it neatly on the table. My part, I said. Ethan's head snapped up. What are you doing? I'm done here. You can't just leave. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the man who had shared my bed, walked through my front door like it was his, and taken everything I gave him while still finding a way to feel embarrassed by me. Watch me, I said softly. I stood up, no shaking hands, no dramatic gestures, just done. Good luck with that, I added, almost gently. Then I turned and walked out. The cool night air hit my face like a reset. For a second, I just stood there on the sidewalk, breathing. Not crying, not angry, just empty, in that strange, clean way that comes after something finally ends. I got into my car, drove home, and sat in my living room with the lights off. My house, my space, my life. For the first time in months, it felt quiet again. My phone started buzzing around 11. Ethan, call, text, call again. I flipped it over and ignored it. A few minutes later, another message came through. Ethan, Naomi, I'm sorry, I didn't mean what I said. Then another. Lila had to cover part of my bill. Can you send me the money for dinner? I stared at the screen, and then I laughed. Not loud, not bitter, just disbelief. After everything, that was what he led with. Not I hurt you. Not I was wrong. Can you send me money? I locked my phone and set it down. A little after midnight, I heard the front door open. Keys. His keys. The ones I had given him. Naomi, his voice called out softly. I didn't answer. He walked down the hallway and stopped outside my bedroom door. Can we talk? Silence. Please. I got up, walked over, and locked the door. Not angrily, just deliberately. On the other side, I heard him exhale. Then nothing. The next morning, he was gone. No confrontation, no apology, just a note on the kitchen counter. Staying at Lila's for a few days. We both need space. I read it once, then set it down. Space. That was fine, because for the first time, I wasn't trying to close the distance anymore. I was letting it open. And somewhere in the back of my mind, something quiet and certain settled in. He wasn't coming back from this. Not really. He just didn't know it yet. Sunday felt different. Not dramatic, not heavy, just clear. Like when a storm passes overnight and you wake up expecting wreckage, but instead everything is still, just rearranged enough that you can finally see what was already broken. I made coffee, stood in my kitchen, and looked around. Nothing had changed. Same countertops, same sunlight slipping through the blinds, same quiet hum of the fridge. Except now every object felt reclaimed. Because for the first time since Ethan moved in, this place didn't feel shared. It felt like mine again. His note was still on the counter. We both need space. I let out a slow breath. No, I thought. You needed distance from consequences. I just needed truth. I spent most of the morning doing small things. Laundry, organizing invoices, answering client messages. The kind of grounded work that had always centered me. The kind Ethan used to say he admired. Before admiration turned into embarrassment. Around early afternoon, I headed out to the hardware store to pick up supplies for a job scheduled the next day. Routine. Familiar. Safe. And that's where everything shifted again. I was in the plumbing aisle, scanning fittings, when I heard my name. Naomi? I turned. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Then it clicked. Lucas? He smiled, surprised. Yeah, wow, it's been a while. We stood there for a moment, both caught between past and present. Lucas had been someone I knew back in high school. Not close, but familiar. Easy to talk to. The kind of person who never made things complicated. Now, standing in front of me, he looked steadier. Older in a good way. Grounded. What are you doing here? I asked. Just moved back about a month ago, he said. Got a job at the hospital. I'm working as a nurse now. That's amazing. He shrugged lightly. Feels good to be back. What about you? I hesitated for half a second. Then I said it. I run my own plumbing business. No edits, no softening, No translating it into something more acceptable.
Lucas's reaction was immediate. That's incredible.
Simple and sincere. Something inside me eased. We ended up talking in the parking lot for almost an hour. About work. About how life had gone after school. About the kind of things you don't realize you've been missing until someone actually listens. The entire time, not once, not even once, did he make me feel like I needed to justify who I was.
Before we parted, he smiled and said, "We should grab coffee sometime, catch up properly."
I found myself smiling back. I'd like that. We exchanged numbers. And as I got into my car, something small but important settled in my chest.
Not excitement. Not yet. Just possibility.
Monday, Ethan came by while I was at work. I knew because when I got home, a few more of his things were gone. Shoes missing from the entryway, some clothes from the closet, the toothbrush from the bathroom. He'd clearly come for another load after spending the weekend elsewhere, taking enough to live out of a suitcase while still leaving himself the option to come back. And of course, there was another note. Still thinking, we should talk when things calm down. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I folded it once and dropped it in the trash, because nothing about this was unclear anymore. He wasn't confused. He was adjusting. Trying to figure out how to come back without losing face. Trying to rewrite what happened into something smaller. Something forgivable. But some things don't shrink just because someone wishes they would. Tuesday, I met Lucas for coffee. We sat in a quiet corner, sunlight filtering through the windows, and talked for 3 hours straight. No tension, no performance, no subtle digs wrapped in polite conversation. Just easy. At one point, he asked about my business again. "So how did you start it?" he said, genuinely curious. And I told him about taking my first small jobs, about working late nights, about learning everything the hard way, about building something stable from nothing. He listened, really listened. Then he shook his head slightly, impressed. "That takes guts. Most people talk about doing something like that. You actually did it." I felt something shift again. Because it wasn't just what he said. It was what he didn't say. He didn't compare. Didn't measure me against anyone else. Didn't try to turn my life into a conversation about status. He just saw it. Saw me. And for a moment, I wondered how I had gotten so used to being with someone who didn't. Wednesday, Lucas came over for dinner. Nothing fancy, just burgers on the grill, music playing softly in the background. The kind of night that felt real without trying. He walked through the front door and paused, looking around. "Wait," he said, glancing back at me. "You own this place?" I nodded. "Bought it a few years ago." He let out a low whistle. "Naomi, this is amazing." There it was again. No hesitation, no discomfort, just appreciation. "It's nothing crazy," I said, brushing it off automatically. He shook his head. "No, it's everything most people our age are still working toward." I didn't know what to say to that, because somewhere along the way I had stopped seeing it that way myself. We ate, talked, laughed. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was being quietly evaluated. I felt relaxed. Safe, even. Thursday, Ethan texted. "Can we meet, please?" I looked at the message, then locked my phone. No reply. Friday, he called. I didn't answer. A few hours later, my mom called me instead. I picked up. "Hey, Mom." There was a pause. Then she said, half amused, half incredulous, "Naomi, some man just called me crying about how he made a mistake and needs you back." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course he did. "What did you tell him?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "I told him if he was dumb enough to be embarrassed about a woman who owns her own house and business, then he deserved exactly what he got." A small smile tugged at my lips. "Mom." "What?" she said. "I meant it." "I know. And for the record," she added, her voice softening slightly, "you were raised better than to chase after someone who can't see your worth." That landed deeper than she probably realized. "Yeah," I said quietly, "I was." Saturday night, Lucas and I went out. A real date. The kind that didn't feel like a test. We sat across from each other, talked about everything and nothing, and somewhere in the middle of it, he asked gently, "So, what happened with your last relationship?" I didn't overthink it. "He was embarrassed by my job," I said simply. Thought it made him look bad. Lucas frowned like the idea genuinely didn't make sense to him. "That's insane." I let out a small breath. Apparently not to him. He shook his head. "You're successful. You built something solid. What more is there?" I held his gaze for a moment. "Apparently, something that sounded fancier." He leaned back slightly, considering that. "Then that's his loss. Simple, final. And for the first time, I believed it. Not in a loud, defensive way. Just quietly. When he dropped me off later that night, he walked me to the door. We stood there for a second, the night calm around us. "Tonight was really nice," he said. "It was." He hesitated just a fraction, then leaned in and kissed me. Soft, uncomplicated, real.
And something inside me, the part that had been bracing, shrinking, adjusting, finally relaxed. Not because everything was suddenly perfect, but because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to fit into someone else's version of what I should be. Over the next few days, Lucas and I kept seeing each other. Nothing rushed, nothing forced, just a quiet, steady rhythm that made room for trust. By the end of the week, calling him my boyfriend didn't feel sudden. It felt like naming something that had already become clear.
A week passed. Quiet, steady, good. And then, exactly 7 days after that dinner, the doorbell rang. I opened it, and there he was, Ethan, standing on my doorstep, crying. 2 suitcases behind him. I understood it instantly. He'd spent the first days pretending this was temporary, taking only what he needed, leaving enough behind to keep 1 foot in the house. But now, whatever arrangement he'd been leaning on had clearly run out, and he was here trying to reverse the choice he'd already made. "Naomi," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank God you're home." I stared at him, taking in the red eyes, the disheveled look, the desperation he wasn't even trying to hide. "I've been thinking all week," he rushed on. "I know I messed up. I know I can fix this." Fix this. Like it was a cracked plate. Like it hadn't shattered completely. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me just enough that he couldn't see inside. "Ethan," I said, calm, "what are you doing here?" "I'm coming back," he said immediately. I realize now. I was wrong. Completely wrong. I looked at the suitcases, then back at him. "You can't just come back." "Naomi, please, just listen." And right then, headlights pulled into the driveway. A car door opened. Footsteps. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Lucas, carrying takeout, a bottle of wine in his other hand, walking toward the house like he belonged there. Ethan's voice cut off mid-sentence. He turned. "Saw him." "Who is that?" he asked, his tone shifting instantly. I didn't hesitate. "That's Lucas." He looked back at me, confusion snapping into something sharper. "Lucas who?" I met his eyes. "My boyfriend." Everything in his expression collapsed. "You're what?" Behind him, Lucas reached the door, glancing between us, clearly trying to understand what he had just walked into. "Hey," he said carefully. "Everything okay?" I didn't look away from Ethan. "Everything's fine," I said. Then, quieter, "He was just leaving." Ethan didn't move. Not when I said it. Not when Lucas stepped fully into the space beside me. Not even when the silence stretched long enough to make it obvious this wasn't a misunderstanding. He was just leaving. Those words should have ended it. Clean, simple, final. But Ethan wasn't ready for final. "I'm not leaving," he said, his voice tightening. "Naomi, we need to talk." Lucas shifted slightly, setting the takeout and wine down on the small table by the door, his eyes moving between us. Not intrusive, not territorial, just aware. "I can come back later," he said quietly. "No," I said immediately. Then I turned back to Ethan. "You can go." His face twisted, something between hurt and disbelief. "Go? Naomi, we lived together. You moved out." "I said I needed space." "You packed your things and left," I corrected calmly. "That's not space. That's a decision." "That's not fair." "What's not fair," I cut in, still level, "is standing in front of me like last week didn't happen." Lucas stayed silent. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to take over, and somehow that made his presence even stronger. Ethan noticed it too. His eyes flicked toward Lucas, then back to me, something sharper rising under the desperation. "So this is what?" he said. "You replaced me in a week?" "I didn't replace you," I said. "You removed yourself." "That's not what happened." "It is," I said simply. "You just didn't expect me to accept it." He let out a harsh breath, running a hand through his hair. "I made a mistake. I admitted that. I've been thinking all week, talking to people." "Lila and Brooke?" I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation was enough. "They told me I went too far," he rushed on. "They said I was out of line, that I shouldn't have said those things." I tilted my head slightly. "So your friends had to explain basic decency to you." "That's not the point." "It is," I said, "because if they hadn't said anything, you'd still think you were right." His jaw tightened. "I came here to fix things," he said, "not argue. There's nothing to fix." "Yes, there is," he insisted, stepping closer. "I love you, Naomi." The words hung there. Empty. Not because love couldn't exist, but because of the timing. Because of what had already been said. Because of everything he chose not to say when it mattered. I held his gaze. "You didn't love me at that table," I said quietly. "That's not true." "You didn't respect me at that table," I corrected. He faltered. Just for a second, and that second was enough. Lucas shifted slightly behind me, not stepping in, but there if I needed him. "I didn't. I had this. You let them talk about me like I was small," I continued. "Like I had limits. Like I wasn't enough." I didn't agree with them. "You didn't disagree," I said.
Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. You said it was about appearances, I added. You said that out loud. Ethan swallowed. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Because there was no better version. I nodded once. Exactly.
He took a step forward, lowering his voice. I was wrong. I know that now. I've been miserable all week, Naomi. I can't sleep. I can't focus. I keep replaying everything I said.
That's the result of what you did, I said gently. His expression cracked. I don't want that. I want you.
That line might have worked a week ago.
Before the restaurant, before the silence, before the truth. Now, it just sounded like someone who didn't like the outcome of his own choices. You don't want me, I said. You want what I gave you. He shook his head quickly. That's not true. You want the house, I continued calmly. The stability. The fact that you didn't have to worry about rent, bills, or what happened if something went wrong. That's not fair. It's accurate. His breathing got heavier. You think this is about money? I think everything you said that night proves it was never as simple as you pretended. It was never about money. Then why was one of the first things you texted me asking me to send you money for dinner? I cut in. That stopped him. Completely.
Lucas's eyes flicked toward me, then back to Ethan, something unreadable passing through his expression.
Ethan looked like he had just been caught off guard by his own memory. I was stressed, he said weakly. You were consistent, I corrected. Silence again. Longer this time. More final. I talked to everyone, he tried again, softer now. They all said I messed up, that I was crazy to say what I said. I studied him. Not with anger, not with bitterness, just clarity. You weren't crazy, I said. His head snapped up. What? You were honest.
And that hit harder than anything else.
Because honesty doesn't come with an excuse. It reveals. It doesn't negotiate. You showed me exactly how you see me, I continued, and I believe you.
His eyes filled again. That's not how I see you.
It is, I said. You just wish you hadn't said it out loud. That broke something in his expression. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. Behind me, Lucas stepped forward slightly. Not aggressive, not confrontational, just present. Hey, he said calmly, I think it's time you go. Ethan turned toward him, irritation flashing. This doesn't concern you. Lucas didn't react to the tone. It concerns her, and she's asked you to leave. Ethan looked back at me, like maybe, just maybe, there was still a version of this where I would soften, where I would remember the good parts, where I would ignore the rest. But that version of me, the one that explained things away, the one that shrank to keep the peace, the one that hoped instead of seeing, she wasn't here anymore. I'm not leaving until we fix this, he said, desperation rising again. There's nothing to fix, I said. Yes, there is, You lost me, I said, not raising my voice. At that table. Silence. Then quieter, more final. You just didn't realize it yet. He stood there, suitcases behind him. Everything he thought he could come back to sitting just out of reach. And for the first time since I'd opened the door, he stopped arguing, stopped explaining, stopped trying to control the narrative, because there was nothing left to control. After a long moment, he let out a shaky breath, then another. His shoulders dropped slightly. Not acceptance, but something close to it. This isn't over, he said, though there was less conviction behind it now. I didn't respond, because it was. He stood there for another second, then turned, walked back to his car, loaded the suitcases in, didn't look back. The engine started. The headlights swept across the driveway, and then he was gone. Just like that. The door closed, and with it, everything that version of my life had been built on. We stood there for a moment afterward. Not awkward, not heavy, just quiet. Lucas didn't rush to fill it. Didn't start asking a dozen questions. Didn't turn the situation into something dramatic. He just looked at me, really looked, and waited. That alone told me more about him than anything he could have said. I'm sorry about that, I said finally. He shook his head. You don't have to apologize. I kind of do, I said with a small, tired smile. That wasn't exactly a normal dinner and movie start. That got a light laugh out of him. Fair, he said. Then, more gently, do you want to talk about it? I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because I realized I hadn't actually told the full story out loud yet. Not the real version. The one without excuses. Without softening. Without trying to make someone else look better than they were. So I nodded. Yeah, I said, I think I do. We moved into the living room. The takeout was still warm. The wine sat unopened on the table. Normal things. Grounding things. I told him everything. From the beginning. How Ethan and I met. How things started out good. How the comments slowly crept in. How support turned into subtle correction. How correction turned into embarrassment. And how embarrassment finally turned into that moment at the restaurant. I didn't rush it, didn't dramatize it, just told the truth. Lucas didn't interrupt once, not to judge, not to defend, not to jump ahead. He just listened. And when I finished, there was a brief pause. Then he said quietly, "He sounds like someone who cared more about what other people thought than what he actually had." Simple. Accurate. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Yeah, that's exactly it. He leaned back slightly, thinking.
People like that don't realize what they've got until they see it through someone else's eyes. And by then, it's usually too late.
That landed, because that's exactly what tonight had been. Too late. He gave me a soft, reassuring look.
For what it's worth, I think what you built is impressive, not in a flashy way, in a solid way.
I smiled faintly. Thanks.
I mean it, he said. You didn't just chase something that looked good, you built something that works.
That meant more than anything Ethan had ever tried to say. Because it was real. Because it didn't need decoration.
We ate after that, talked about lighter things, let the tension dissolve naturally instead of forcing it away. And somewhere between the food and the quiet conversation, I realized something important.
I wasn't thinking about Ethan anymore, not replaying his words,
not questioning myself, not trying to make sense of it.
He had become background, not erased, but no longer central. And that shift was everything. Over the next few weeks, life settled. Not perfectly, but steadily. Lucas and I didn't force anything. We just kept showing up, consistently, easily. And the more time I spent with him, the more I noticed the absence of something I hadn't realized was always there before. Tension. There were no small digs hidden inside jokes, no moments where I felt like I had to explain myself just to be understood, no subtle pressure to become something else. I was just me, and that was enough. Ethan tried to reach it out a few more times. Calls, texts, even a long message that started with, "I've been doing a lot of thinking." I didn't open it, didn't need to, because I already knew what it would say. Apology, regret, promises to change. But none of it mattered anymore. Not because people can't change, but because some changes come too late to rebuild what was already broken. I blocked his number. Not out of anger, out of clarity. A few days later, I got a message from someone unexpected. Lila. Hey, I just wanted to say, that night was really uncomfortable. A lot of people at work think Ethan went too far. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back. He did. That was it. No bitterness, no need to say more. Because validation from them wasn't what I needed. Not anymore.
About a week after that, I ran into Daniel at a gas station. He looked different, less polished, more human.
"Naomi," he said a little awkwardly.
Hey.
Hey.
There was a brief pause, then he scratched the back of his neck.
"Look, about that dinner. You don't have to," I started. "No, I do," he cut in. "That was messed up, what he said. And honestly, I was impressed when you said what you make." I raised an eyebrow slightly. Wasn't the reaction I expected. He gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "Yeah, well, I guess people assume things." "Yeah," I said, "they do." He nodded. Then quieter. "For what it's worth, he's not doing great." I didn't react, didn't ask, so he continued anyway. "He's been pretty miserable. Keeps asking about you, trying to get updates through people." I let out a small breath. That's unfortunate. Daniel studied me for a second, like he was expecting more. More emotion, more reaction. But there wasn't any, because by that point, it didn't affect me anymore. He moved back in with his parents, Daniel added. Couldn't really afford his own place. That part almost made me smile. Not out of spite, just irony. From criticizing my house to losing access to it entirely. "Hope he figures things out," I said. And I meant it, just not in the way he probably wished. That night, I sat on my couch, the same place I had been the night everything fell apart. Except now it felt different. Not empty, not quiet in a lonely way. Just peaceful. Lucas was in the kitchen, grabbing us drinks. Music played softly in the background. And I realized something that didn't feel dramatic, but felt true. I didn't need closure from Ethan. Because closure wasn't something he could give me. He didn't have that kind of clarity. I had given it to myself. The moment I walked out of that restaurant. The moment I chose not to answer those messages. The moment I didn't open that door again. Sometimes people don't lose you because of one mistake. They lose you because that mistake reveals who they've been all along. And once you see it clearly, there's no going back to not knowing. A few weeks later, the story stopped feeling like something I was in and started feeling like something that had already happened. Not in a distant way, just settled. Like the emotional noise had finally cleared, and what was left was simple. True. Lucas and I were sitting on the back patio one evening, the sun dropping low, the air warm and quiet. He was talking about a shift at the hospital, something chaotic but oddly meaningful, and I was half listening, half watching the way everything felt easy. No tension, no performance, no part of me scanning for hidden criticism.
That alone told me everything I needed to know about the difference between what I had and what I used to call love. At some point, he paused and looked at me.
"You're doing that thing," he said.
"What thing?"
"Thinking too hard."
I smiled slightly. "Occupational hazard." "About him?" he asked, not pushing, just asking.
I considered it, then shook my head.
"No," I said, "not really."
And that was the truth. Because Ethan wasn't something I was trying to understand anymore. He was something I had already figured out.
The last piece of information about him came a few days later.
Not from him, from Brooke, of all people. She sent a short message.
"Hey, just thought you should know. He's been telling people he's trying to win you back."
I read it once, then set my phone down. No reaction.
A few minutes later, another message came through. "Also, he's back living with his parents. Things didn't really work out after everything."
I leaned back slightly in my chair. There it was. Not dramatic, not explosive, just the natural outcome.
He had traded stability for approval.
Something solid for something that only looked good from the outside.
And when the outside disappeared, there was nothing left to hold him up. Later that night, I walked through my house.
Not because I needed to, just because I could.
Every room felt the same as it always had.
But I didn't.
I noticed things I had stopped seeing. The way the light hit the floors, the quiet strength of a place built without shortcuts, the fact that everything around me existed because I had made it happen.
Not because it looked impressive, because it worked.
And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. People like to talk about revenge, about getting even, about making someone regret what they did. But the truth is, I didn't need any of that. I didn't need to prove anything to Ethan. Didn't need him to understand what he lost. Didn't need him to come back and say the perfect apology.
Because the moment he said those words at that table, he had already made the decision that led here.
All I did was stop stopping him.
Lucas found me standing in the hallway, lost in thought.
"You okay?" he asked.
I turned toward him and smiled.
"Yeah," I said, "I really am."
He studied me for a second, then nodded like he believed it. Because it wasn't forced. It wasn't defensive. It was just true. Some people think the worst thing that can happen in a relationship is being left. It's not.
The worst thing is staying with someone who quietly believes you're not enough and learning to believe it too.
I got lucky. I didn't stay long enough for that part.
Ethan didn't lose me because he made one mistake.
He lost me because that mistake revealed exactly who he was. And once you see that clearly, you don't fight to keep it. You walk away.
The last time I ever heard about him was through someone else, weeks later. Apparently, he still talked about that night, still tried to explain it, still framed it like something that got out of hand.
But the truth? It didn't get out of hand. It got revealed.
And sometimes that's worse. I closed the door that night, literally and figuratively, and I didn't look back.
Because I didn't need to.
Everything I needed to understand was already behind me.
And everything that mattered was right in front of me. Quiet.
Solid. And finally mine.